Hi guys, it's me Marilia, and today we are going to delve into the Shad and Lori Daybell case. This is part 2, and I'm just going to give you the heads up on these videos. I do these videos as a hobby. They're not a source of income, and that's why some of the times I'm a little delayed in my schedule. I have other calls in my life that I have to pay attention to, but I try to be as consistent as I possibly can. Having said that, I am not going to focus so much on inserting images and documents to substantiate the story I'm telling. I feel that this story has gotten enough news coverage in the media that if you are interested in finding out the facts, it's easy enough to turn into, I think it's East Idaho News, and you can get the full story there. Or you can just Google it, because this is all over the place. It's worldwide. But the reason that I'm doing that is so that I can get these videos processed in a more timely fashion. And the other thing is I'm not going to try to cut out on the quality of the videos. I'm just going to try to focus more on the storytelling aspects of this. So let's go ahead and get into this one. By the way, in case I haven't already introduced myself, I'm Marilia. This is Salto del Gato, my YouTube channel, and this is the Gumshoe playlist. And like I said, the crime that I am going to be storytelling about is the Lori and Chad Daybell crime story, and this is my second video on this topic. Lori Noreen Cox. As I relay this information, I will be mentioning several people. There's a young woman named Megan, who is Lori's cousin. She's one of 24 cousins in the circle of cousins in their family. And they would visit this family, the Megan's family would visit the Coxes and stay with them during the summer and on extended weekends. So they have a real deep insight into the family dynamics. The other person that I will mention is Alex's first wife, and I don't know her name, but I am referencing a telephone interview that she gave to the East Idaho News. The other person that I mention is Adam Cox. He is Lori and Alex's brother, and he has quite a story to tell. Again, he interviewed with the East Idaho News. There are two Melanies in this story. One of them is Melanie Gibbs, and there is also a Melanie Bordeaux, now also Pulaski. Melanie Bordeaux is Lori's niece. Her mother was Lori's older sister, Stacy, who passed away when Melanie was 9 years old. Melanie, she bought into the whole Chad and Lori story of their doctrine of crazy, really, but it was of the fact that their mission was to lead and gather the 144,000. Now, Melanie Bordeaux was married to Brandon Bordeaux. In the whole following Lori, because she looked at Lori as a second mother, it caused her and her husband Brandon's marriage to fail. Lori convinced her that Brandon was a homosexual and a dark spirit, so she left Brandon, eventually divorcing him, and lost custody of their 4 children, of which Lori incidentally said 2 of them were dark spirits, and we'll get more into that. But before she divorced Brandon, there was a failed assassination attempt on Brandon, and it's suspected that Alex was the shooter. Incidentally, prior to her death, Tammy Daybell, Shad's wife, was also shot at while she was outside of her house returning from a clogging. She was clogging the dance, I guess, practice. And Alex is suspected in that also, and his car was tracked to a church nearby on that night. But I get ahead of myself. Let's start the story. For a more detailed description of all these characters, I have a first video on this crime that I've already posted where I think I outlined them all in a pretty good chronological order. I'll try to link it below this one in the details section. I'm not sure that I know how to do that, but I'll try to figure that out. Lori Daybell, formerly Lori Vallow, Lori Ryan, Lori Williams, and Lori Yanes. She was born Lori Noreen Cox. Her story begins on June 26 of 1973 in San Bernardino, California. On that day, Janice Cox gave birth to her and her husband Barry Cox's fifth child, a girl. They named her Lori Noreen Cox. She was born under the zodiac sign of Cancer. The family was a middle-class Mormon family. Lori grew up in the Mormon church. She attended private schools, and Wikipedia lists her as having attended a reputed private university, which I will assume was a Mormon university. Her siblings were Stacy Cox, who was the eldest. She evidently dealt with depression. Her marriage, I believe, had fallen apart at the time of her death, and she had some residual issues that her cousin Megan alluded to that may have stemmed from her mother, who, Janice, had some eating disorders and possibly, allegedly, body dysmorphia issues. So Stacy inherited those from Janice. Janice was known to chew her food and then spit it out on the plate. And when asked in bewilderment by anyone at the table what she was doing, her response was that she didn't have to swallow her food. All she had to do was taste it. Obviously, this is the first glimpse at some form of dysfunction that we see, but it doesn't end there. The entire family seemed to be hyper-focused on body image. They spent hours getting dressed. Even if it was just to go to the pool, they had to put on their makeup, get their hair done, and shave certain areas of their body. I mean, it was all about a perfect image. Megan says that she recalls as a child that whenever she ran into the Coxes or visited them, or they visited her, their greeting was always image focused. They'd say, "Oh, you look beautiful. Your makeup is perfect. I love your hairdo. Your outfit is striking." They never asked, "Hi, how are you doing? Are you okay?" All of their conversations were very superficial and centered on body image. How much weight they gained, how much weight they lost, or how their exercising program was going. If these allegations about Janice's eating habits are true, then obviously her daughters would have been influenced, and not in a positive way, by that. Now, Megan also says that the conversation between the mother, Janice, and the father, Barry, was very uncomfortable at times because they were very sexually explicit and open about their intimate life, and that it was just open conversation in the household in front of all the children and the cousins. Now, she relays this experience that she had when the family all still lived in California. She said that's where she basically experienced the family. But Megan and Alex's ex-wife both say that they do not recall Alex acting overtly sexual toward the older sister, Stacy, or the younger sister, Summer, that all of his actions were targeted towards Lori, and she seems to have eaten it up. Alex is the second born. What we know about him is that when he was 17 years old, he got into a very serious accident with his truck. He was really injured, but because in California at that time, and maybe it's still the same way, you did not have to have automobile insurance. You could self-insure. I guess that meant you had to have a certain amount of money put aside. And if anything were to happen, you'd be able to cover the damages. Anyway, he never reported the accident, and he never went to the hospital. He never received any medical assessment or treatment, and so the suspicions are that he probably suffered quite a severe head injury that caused some very serious head trauma. Perhaps that might explain his behavior in later years, especially his inclination for homicide. We also know that he was a stand-up comedian, but he managed to work he was a long-haul truck driver and made decent money. Some media sources report that he made up to $8,000 a couple of times a month. Now, there are some very bizarre speculations, unproven, but certainly rumored, that he had a bizarre attachment to his sister Lori. Someone reported that he SA'd her when she was still living at home as a teenager. Now, that SA may not have been physical consummation, but certainly was inappropriate for siblings. His ex-wife gave her impressions of how the family in general seemed to have inappropriate boundaries regarding physical contact with each other. She did this in a telephone interview with East Idaho News, which I referred to earlier. She said it begins with the mother and father, which is Janice and her husband, Barry, and filters down to the siblings. But the behavior was very prominent between Alex and Lori, who would simulate inappropriate intimacy with each other. Alex seemed to follow Lori around wherever she moved like a puppy dog. He moved right next door to her. It just seemed like he was just always inserting himself in her life. Alex was arrested and actually served time in prison in 2017 because he assaulted a man named Joseph Anthony Ryan, which was Lori's third husband. Joseph Ryan passed away from what it is said to have been a heart attack, but now suspicions are being raised whether or not it was truly a heart attack. The reason that he assaulted Joseph was because Lori accused him of having molested her son, Kobe, and their daughter, Tylee, and claimed that he was abusive to her. So we see Alex taking on the role of Lori's protector and defender, which is one of the things that Chad told him was his purpose. Or we could also look at Alex as Lori's on-call assassin. According to Adam Cox, who's the brother of Lori and Alex, in an interview that he also gave to the East Idaho News, here's what he said about that incident. He said that around the time that Joseph Ryan was assaulted by Alex and Lori had planned to kill Joseph Ryan because she was running out of money and she would have collected on Joseph Ryan's insurance policy, which was about $50,000. And I think they said Tylee would have gotten like $2,000. So the plan was that Alex was going to go and taser Joseph with his taser and then put him in the trunk of his car and then take him out and shoot him and bury him. But it backfired because Joseph fought back and Alex was not able to kill him. And Joseph was able to call the police, who arrested Alex, and he served a year in prison for that. In an interview with Alex's ex-wife, she says Alex was still seething mad about that when he came out of prison, and she had spoken to him, which caused her to say, I don't want to ever speak to Alex again, because he was still kind of batshit crazy. Now, the Coxes had a third child named Lori, who was born before Lori. That child died in infancy, and I'm not sure what caused her death. Megan said that in hindsight, looking over all these horrible occurrences, and she said that she wondered if they shouldn't go back into the history of this family and look into all of the deaths, Lori, Stacy, Joseph Ryan, and so on, because it seems Alex might have been a contributing factor in all of them. So my question is it possible that this 17-year-old teenager, Alex, sustained a traumatic brain injury from his car accident, and it somehow caused him to develop into a homicidal killer, or it activated a predisposition to that kind of insanity? And if so, didn't anyone in the family suspect him? When exactly did Lori decide Alex's talent for murder was something she could use as she moved from husband to husband? Adam, the third child, seems to be kind of in the background of all of this mess. He seems to be at odds with the family, and in one of Lori's fantasies, she said that Adam was trying to kill her. We know now that anytime Lori says somebody's trying to kill her or calls them a dark spirit, they wind up dead. Just saying. Adam is a DJ in Kansas and keeps to himself as much as possible and as far away from this mess that is Lori as he can. Now, in this interview with the East Idaho News, Adam did say that he and his mother and father had a wonderful relationship up until Charles Vallow's death. He says that when Charles Vallow was killed, the mother and father had a screaming match with him and kicked him out of the house because Lori found texts between Charles and Adam where they had discussed with each other and were expressing their concern over Lori's mental health. And they even suggested that they were going to go and speak to the president of the LDS Church in Arizona to see if he would intervene and see if there was some way that they could get Lori help. When she got a hold of those messages, she went ballistic and turned the entire family against Adam. Leading up to Charles' murder, Adam had discussed with Alec that he was going to be in town and asked to meet up with him, even asked if he could spend the night at his house. He couldn't get a hold of Alex when he called. I think that was lucky for him that he wasn't able to get a hold of Alex, because I'm afraid Alex would probably have killed him. The same thing goes for Melanie Bordeaux's children. When Melanie separated from her husband Brandon, he got custody of their 4 kids, and it's a good thing. Conversations had taken place where Lori and Chad had decided that a couple of Melanie's children were dark spirits, and that's the kiss of death. So as bad as this has gotten, it could have been much worse, in my opinion. I begin to see the pattern where it's easy to say, wow, Chad turned Lori. He turned her into this crazy woman. But I disagree with that, because if we go back in time, she had turned to her brother Alex to plan how to murder her ex-husband Joseph Ryan. And Alex seems to have developed his homicidal tendencies after that accident when he was 17 years old. And the death of his sister Stacy comes into question. And I'm not very well informed about what caused the death of the other sister. But she died in infancy. And her name, like I said, was Laura Lee. But it just seems that the pattern developed from there between Alex and Lori and their connections to the death of siblings and other people around them. In an interview that Megan, which is Lori's cousin, gave to Hidden True Crime, she shows medical records containing physicians' notes about Stacy's treatments, her mental state, and the influences of her mother's eating habits, and so on. Megan says that in hindsight, Alex's behavior of the night she died is suspicious to her now. She said that he convinced her to go with him to check on Stacy, who he said he was worried about. She was home alone because the rest of the family was in Hawaii, with, of course, the exception of Alex. When they arrived, they find her unresponsive and immediately dial 911. She never recovers. She was moved from the hospital to hospice and died a few days later. Now, interestingly, her parents never made it back in time. The rest of her siblings all remained with their parents in Hawaii, and they all said that they had a hard time booking a flight back. Could have been. There was a lot of them. When they returned, Stacy had already passed away. Something suspicious about her death Megan found in her autopsy, which showed alcohol in her system, which Megan questioned as, according to Megan, Stacy was not known to drink. So to recap, the siblings, there is Stacy, there is Alex, there is Adam, there is Laura Lee, there is Lori, and then there's Summer. So there was originally 6 of them. And now there's only 3 left, and one of them is going to probably be locked up for the rest of her life. Let's unpack a little bit about Joseph Anthony Ryan and the accusations that Lori brought against him, the essays. Now, his history isn't easy. He came from either a broken marriage or a single mother who was drug addicted and had her own issues, and he had a rough upbringing. A lot of trauma, a lot of stuff in his past. He was known to be very violent and aggressive. And his own sister, who was interviewed, mentioned these things. So, having said that, it might have been true that he was an abusive partner and that he might have mistreated Lori and the children. And maybe she was instinctively trying to protect her son. So we could give her the benefit of the doubt as to that time in her life. And then something else happened. Maybe it was years. I think they were involved in several years of custody disputes because he was trying to gain custody of his daughter, Tylee. And I think that through the years, this wore thin. And as Lori's state of mind progressed to the level that it eventually got, in her desperation for need of money and trying to get rid of the aggravation, she planned with her brother to have him taken care of. So there is that component to the relationship between Joseph Ryan and Lori. There isn't anything that I could find that explains the relationship between her previous husbands and her. I know nothing about. I think that the first husband, Nelson Yanes, he was, or Yanes, I don't know the correct pronunciation of his name, but I think he was like a childhood, teenage love thing, and they ran away and got married, and I think her father had that marriage end quickly because they didn't approve of the young man. I don't know if he was Mormon or if, she had married out of the church community. I don't know. And the second husband, William Logeria, he's the father of Kobe. No one ever mentions him, so he just, disappeared, I guess. So I know nothing about him. It's really at Joseph Ryan, which is the third husband, and Charles Vallow, the fourth husband, that we even get to know the spouses, Lori's spouses. Now, let's talk about Charles Vallow. Charles Vallow was considerably older than Lori. He was 13 years her senior. The way they met is that she was a hairstylist, and she used to style his hair. And he fell in love with her. And he, by all accounts, worshipped the ground that she walked on. He was madly and blindly in love with her. So somewhere down the line, they were married 14 years, but somewhere through those 14 years, she stopped feeling the same for him. And things changed. She changed, and that marriage fell apart. The man is no longer with us here, but from what I hear, people who knew them talk about, it seems like he really worshipped the ground she walked on, but he worked very hard, and he worked away from home a lot. Now, sometimes that helps a marriage last longer because, some people can say, we were married 15 years, but then my husband, or, was a pilot and he traveled and he was gone all the time. And then when the spouse retires and you're both home under the same roof, it's not surprising when marriages fall apart. But most marriages don't wind up in homicide. They wind up in divorce court. And that wasn't the case for this unfortunate marriage. And then she marries Chad. Now, that story ends here in both of them being accused of murder, but I often wonder what would have happened if they had stayed together. Who would have fallen out of love first? Would it have been Lori? I think it would have. I think Lori would have gotten over her goddess status, and maybe, she wanted something more or whatever. And I think she would have conjured up some reason to leave him. But this would have been a battle of the dark spirits. Chad may have, if they had grown their cult, there might have been a split in the cult, right? Somebody might have done the other one in. But now we're going to see this play out in court. Because as it stands, up until I think it was March of this year, everyone was saying, wow, these two are, you can't put a butter knife between them. They're that close, and they're that committed to each other. But then their cases, their trials were severed, because up until then they were professing that they were going to go to court and be tried together. But then someone convinced someone that it's best for them to separate themselves, and their cases were severed. So Lori is being tried first because she did not waive her right to a speedy trial. She wanted to get this over with. So her case was separated, which everyone says might benefit Chad. Chad waived his right for a speedy trial so he could take, longer time and, I guess, learn from the outcome of what was going to happen to Lori for his defense. This might have backfired on him, because I think that the only defense that Lori has is for her attorneys to put the blame on Chad. We'll see this play out. It should be interesting. As we walk through this, it's just like the ideal family, middle class, very good looking, well educated, religious, involved in community activities. And that's all what you see. It's the veil over this group, because under the veil was a very complex, tangled web of dysfunction, of mental illness, of narcissism, of control, and of murder. That's the essence of the story. I thought of labeling this story as, you have a beauty queen, a prophet, a cult. You have money, sex, murder, and zombies. Because at the end, you can't make this up. Lori grew up in what, from the outside, appeared to be a loving, close-knit family that included a large, extended family of about 21 or more cousins. Lori was a cheerleader, and later on in life, she would become a beauty queen. She was 5'7" and weighed about 128 pounds, with long, thick blonde hair that she often curled. She had an athletic frame, and there is no denying that she was quite attractive. Lori's marriages, let's chronicle them. The first one, 1992, to Nelson Yanis, no children. Number 2, 1995, to William Lagoria, that's Kobe's biological father. Number 3, 2001, to Joseph Anthony Ryan, Tylee's biological father. Kobe took his surname. Joseph died in 2018 of an apparent heart attack. Husband number 4, 2006, Charles Vallow. He and Lori adopted JJ, and he was shot and killed by Alex. Number 5, in 2020, Chad Guy Daybell. He and Lori now stand accused of conspiring to murder her daughter Tylee, her adopted son JJ, and Chad's wife Tammy. Charles Vallow was cremated, and Joseph Ryan was cremated. Tylee and JJ, well, Tylee was attempted to be cremated, but when that didn't work, they buried her in a pet cemetery after dismembering. And JJ was buried, but it was just odd. So that's the lead up into this story. Now what happens next is that in 2018, by this time, Lori had begun to follow this, it's like a preppers group, where there were a group of people who would gather together and discuss the end times and how to prepare just in case they happened. So they were actually an offshoot of the LDS Church. Now, the LDS Church in itself has it's a couple of groups. The Fundamental Latter-day Saints Church, which they think they're the originals because they believe in polygamy. They don't, they wear those down on the prairie dresses, and they don't wear makeup, and they adhere to the whole Book of Mormons. Then you have the LDS Church, which I guess you would consider them a bit more progressive, and they are more non-polygamous. They're monogamous in their relationships, and they wear makeup and dress trendy and all of that. And from there, but I believe both of them have a focus on the end times. I'm not Mormon. I don't know a history of it, so this is all alleged. This is what I've gathered from what I've heard. So within these two arms of the Mormon church, you have all these little offshoot groups. And like every other religion, there are some extremists on either end. And you have fringe groups. Lori became involved in one of these, where they were preparing for the end times, and they were sure that it was going to happen. But it wasn't, and so did Chad. So Chad's story, and I'm not going to go into detail here because he hasn't gone to trial, and we're going to have to explore and unpack him. But when he comes into the picture, what he brings is that he's having these things, these visions, and near-death experiences. But before he comes out and claims that these are visions and that the source of them was from a near-death experience, he was a writer of fiction. Who else was that? Ron L. Hubbard and the Scientologists. They're bizarre-ass people. Anyway, I'm trying not to be judgmental, but these are crazy-ass people. And the people that follow them are, I don't get it. Susceptible comes to mind. Vulnerable comes to mind. Weakness comes to mind. Lack of identity, not knowing who you are. Being willing to allow another one to obliterate your identity. Probably because you don't have a well-formed sense of self. It was Socrates who said, the Athenian philosopher, and he cautioned He said, man, know thyself. You know why? So that you don't fall prey to this kind of crazy stuff. Anyway, I lose my train of thought. Chad, when he comes into the picture, he brings on this new layer where these people were already following, because what the Bible, they take the Book of Mormons and they extrapolate from there and create this new fantasy religion. And they interpret what they're reading in these two doctrines a certain way, and that becomes a whole new religion. Well, that's basically what Lori was doing with Melanie and some other guy and some other people. So they already had a group going on. And then they hear about Chad, and Chad had been writing these books, and they were fiction. Now, later on, he takes and he revisits that, and he says, well, they were really not fiction. They were based on real visions that I experienced during a near-death experience. Anyway, whatever he had written in these series of books became the new religion and eventually the new reality for these people. And in it is where he makes these outlandish talk about it. They believed that there were these things called probations, and probations were previous lives. So incarnation plays a part in it. Then they also claimed that in those previous lives, they were these very important characters. He was Methuselah. Yes, a biblical Methuselah. And that he was also the Apostle James and was real tight with Jesus. And in that life where he was the Apostle James, Lori was his wife, and her name was Elena. And they both claimed that they were really tight with Jesus, and they had conversations with him. And even now that he appeared and spoke with them and gave them directives. And they had certain abilities. So Lori and Chad were the leaders of this movement. And it was their job and their mission to gather the 144,000 chosen people and bring them into, lead them through the end times. But they also had a mission because they said that there was 20,000 dark souls that had become zombies in the United States, and that it was their mission to destroy those souls, which is scary as hell, because right there you wonder, wait a minute, what were they doing? Were they going to indoctrinate people into this cult who would then go forth and kill, something like Charles Manson did with his little killer group? And who knows how many people might have lost their lives if these two hadn't been caught. Anyway, going back to their outlandish claims, Chad had these powers, and he had powers to bestow blessings on people. We'll get into what Lori's role was. His abilities were to bless people and give them powers. To Sulema, but she was the woman that married Alex for about 2 weeks before he died. Anyway, he granted to her the power to control the weather and to use fire and knives to destroy and kill people. They would come together in these little group meetings they called sessions or casting sessions or castings. And in here they would concentrate, hold hands, and focus on a person and direct fire and knives to destroy and kill them. Can you imagine? I don't know, but I think that's called cursing, and I think that's evil. That has nothing to do with anything positive. And I am not a believer or follower of any particular structured religion. I believe in God. I have comfortable with that. I don't question or ridicule anybody's form of faith. What I do works for me. I'm good. But in this case that we're talking about, what Chad and Lori were doing in this group was not good. There was nothing good about it. It was horrible, and it generated a lot of really bad energy that I think boomeranged back on them. But Anyway, they were able to convince people that they were able to cast these circles and bad things would happen to these evil spirits. They were also convincing these people that they now had power. So like this Sulema woman, she went around, I guess, thinking that she could conjure up earthquakes. Because one of the ways that they were going to destroy a lot of these 20,000 people was to conjure up earthquakes. So I can imagine any time that a random earthquake or natural disaster happened, they claimed it was them causing it. Now, eventually, Chad and Lori meet, right? And when Chad and Lori meet, shit gets lethal. It seems like to me, up until the time that Chad unites with Lori, this was all a fantasy world. And trust me, they incorporate into this fantasy world the Gerber baby, because they start researching the Gerber baby insurance to see if they can insure some of the kids before they kill them. And Harry Potter, I don't know exactly what, but Chad said that he was like Harry Potter living under the stairs, whatever. These people lived in a fantasy world. But when Lori and Chad got together, Lori had resources, and Alex, who was brain damaged by that accident, and easily convinced him to do her bidding. After all, if what is alleged is fact, she had experience in doing this when she collaborated with Alex to have her ex-husband Joseph killed. And who knows how that came about. Maybe the family used Alex as the family assassin. Maybe he had something to do with Stacy's demise, because the family maybe saw her as, she's clinging on here, she's batshit crazy, let's let her go. I'm just saying, I don't know. But it's questionable. So moving into this new phase, Lori is said to become Alex's goddess. He tells her that she was a goddess, and this is a story he tells her. He had lived in 31 previous worlds, 31 previous lives in 31 different worlds. She had lived in 21 other worlds. They both had shared 5 previous lives on Earth where they were married to each other. And she was a goddess. And she ate that shit up. So she came from cheerleader, beauty queen, to goddess. Can you see it? Can you see the narcissism whirling there? And then we end up here, where we have gotten now documented deaths associated with them. We have the death of Charles Vallow, which is documented that Alex shot him twice and killed him. We have the disappearance, mutilation, dismemberment, and death of Tylee Ryan. And we have the death of J.J. Vallow. And we have the death of Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife. So we have these 4 deaths. But then, right after Tammy's body was exhumed, because as this all starts unraveling and the reality of what might have occurred begins to surface, then they exhume Tammy's body. The day after they exhume Tammy's body, Alex mysteriously dies, allegedly of natural causes. So I think these people might have something that they use to cause these deaths that appear to be from natural causes. In most of the cases, there are no autopsies performed. And when they are, the evidence shows natural causes. But I don't think that because they happen in different states and through different spans of time, no one connecting them looks very much further. I think the one time that they're actually looking a little closer is with Tammy's death, because all this other stuff had come out. Anyway, each one of these alone, to unpack them, will tell a whole different story. Let's start with what led up to Charles Vallow's death. Charles dies. Shortly after, the children disappear. A welfare call is placed by Charles' sister, Kay, and her husband, Larry Woodcock, and to the police so that they would do a welfare check on the children. They contact Lori. She gives them some bizarre story that the children were in protective hiding. She had placed them in to protect them with some friends. None of it pans out. In the interim, while the police are investigating her story, she disappears and was gone for like 58 days. I think she goes to Hawaii. Eventually, the children's bodies are discovered on Chad's property. Before the children's body was found, Tammy dies. So Tammy dies. Tammy is Chad's wife in a bizarre circumstance. She was said to have been very healthy. She was in training for a marathon. She was practicing her clogging dance lessons, and she dies in the middle of the night from, I don't think they even said a cause of death. They just said she died in the middle of the night. She had some pink foam coming out of her mouth. Coroners, medical examiners, investigators, all of them are there. Everybody has some questions, but nobody pursues them. They wanted to do an autopsy, but when the family said, no, we don't want any of that happening to our mother, the law said, okay, we won't do an autopsy. And then she was buried. A week later, friends call Chad to see how are you doing after your wife died. And he says, they said, we'd like to come over and bring you some pizza or some spaghetti. He says, no, I'll go to your house. So he goes to their house. These are the neighbors, the Gilberts. And they said he was doing fine. He said he was doing fine. He said he'd met the woman he was going to marry a week after his wife had just died. They were shocked. And then shortly after that, I think they were married. And I think they were actually married 2 weeks after Tammy was buried. Then, because they had been missing and the police had been looking for them, they traced Lori and Chad to Hawaii. They confronted them over there. They extradited her back to the States, and they arrest her because the children are missing. In the interim, Chad goes back to these neighbors, the Gilberts, and at some point he had introduced them. He introduced them at church, at the temple, and then he introduced them. One day he took Lori to visit. So this must have been before they went to Hawaii and got married. Anyway, when he comes back from Hawaii and Lori has been arrested, he approaches the Gilberts and asks them if he could move into their house because they had a spare bedroom. And they said no because their daughter was moving in. But these people were already suspicious. So then he says, well, Lori has just been arrested. Can you put your house up for bond so that I can get her bonded out? Thank God that these people were not susceptible to him, because they said, oh, well, we're going to think about it. And when he called them back and said, I've got a bond person that's going to talk to you, they said, we're still thinking about it. I'm sorry. And they didn't do it. In that period of time, the bodies of Tylee and JJ were discovered buried in Chad Daybell's property where Tammy had passed away. And so then they arrest Chad. And this is where we're at now, where It's been a zoo. It's been 3 years to get to now where Lori is finally being tried for the conspiracy to murder Tylee and JJ. And eventually she'll be tried for the death or the conspiracy to kill her husband, Charles Vallow. Now, she is facing 2 life sentences for the murder of Tylee and JJ. They were able to take the death. She was facing the death penalty, but her lawyers were able to take that off the table. I think they do that just to make sure that it'll be easier for a jury to convict, because juries sometimes will hesitate to convict someone if they know they're going to receive the death penalty. I don't know why, if they deserve it. But they'll be more likely to convict if they know it's going to be just a life sentence. So I think that's the thing. So we've got Chad, who is a leader appointed by Jesus Christ to lead the 144,000 in preparation for the end times, which, by the way, was scheduled for July 2020. But it didn't happen. It missed the date. It's been rescheduled, folks. I don't mean to laugh, but this is so bizarre. It's a fucking joke is what it is. Anyway, we have Chad, who claims that he has special powers. He can bestow blessings on people and give them the ability to control the weather and use the weather to create earthquakes that will destroy the 20,000 zombies that are walking through the United States, possessed of dark spirits that turns them into zombies. He has the power to create portals where people can go through these portals and communicate with each other or with Jesus Christ, who appears and talks to them and gives them directions as to what they need to do. He has lived on 31 different worlds, and Lori on 21 other worlds. And they have lived 5 other lifetimes on earth married to each other. Amongst those, Chad was Methuselah. He was James, the apostle of Jesus. And Lori was his wife when he was James. And Lori has lived several other lives. And she was even married to the angel Moroni, which I'd never heard of that angel. But evidently, he stands on the top of the Mormon temples. These are special people. These are special people, and you know what I see here? I see mental illness in them and in their followers. Mental illness. So where do we go from here? I don't know. I keep watching, because every day there's a new development. There's just yesterday, some ex-friend of Lori said that Lori threatened her, that she would kill her, cut her up in pieces, and bury her. Holy shit. And we don't know where it's going to go from here, because every day there's something new being discovered. So it's like the craziest of crazies. But I'm bringing it to you, and I hope that you enjoy the story, because I couldn't have made this up. You can't make this stuff up. Anyway, thank you so much for spending this little time with me and listening to my story. And if you enjoyed it, I hope that you consider leaving me a comment. Algorithms like comments. I want to grow this community, because it gives me an opportunity to be able to share with people who find interest in the same things that I do. And if you haven't subscribed already and you find this humorous and enjoyable, if that's possible, consider subscribing. Share this video. It helps others find us. And visit my other playlist. I have a really wonderful playlist about tarot stories where my daughter and I discuss the 22 major arcana trumps. And we are at the 6th card, the Lovers, now. And I also am in the process of launching a whole astrology playlist where I really go into more in depth into astrology. Not the astrological event charts for crimes, but facts and discussions about astrology, as, for instance, the upcoming eclipse, the recent Cassimi, solar eclipses, anything that's significance. So if you enjoy all that kind of stuff, I invite you to check those out and consider leaving me a comment there. Subscribe to this channel. I have a lot of good, interesting, fun things coming up. Thank you so much.